The other day, I watched a friend compose an email. It was a simple work thing, a minor disagreement over a project's direction. First draft was direct. It was honest. You could feel the clarity in it, the straightforward, I think this is a mistake, and here's why. She paused, her finger hovering over the mouse. I saw her expression change, just for a second. A flicker of calculation. Then she sighed, and the backspace key went to work. Delete, delete, delete. What replaced it was a masterclass in corporate pleasantness. It was full of phrases like, just wanted to circle back, and hoping to add a different perspective. It was agreeable. It was safe. It was, in the language of the office, the email of a good team player. But it was also a complete lie. The truth hadn't been softened. It had been surgically removed. And as I watched her press send, I wasn't thinking about the project. I was thinking that the most effective cage isn't one built by a tyrant with armies and flags. It's the one we build for ourselves, right inside our own skull, where the warden is our desperate need to be seen as a good person. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex ideas and hopefully find those fascinating nuggets hidden inside. And today, well, we're diving into something that really resonates with that opening story I just shared. It's this intricate dance, isn't it, between our inner worlds, the public face we present, and these powerful forces in society, and especially online, that kind of push us towards conformity, towards silence maybe. We're going to explore what that internal pressure actually means for our psychological well-being and how it plays out in the wider world, politics, information, and the surprising role technology has in all of this.
Indeed. And what we're looking at today, it really connects some, seemingly disparate threads. We've got the deeply personal psychological theories of Carl Jung, thinking particularly about his ideas of the persona and the shadow. And we're linking that with the sociopolitical critiques of thought control and manufactured consent, things often associated with George Orwell, for instance. Then we'll bring it right into today, looking at how artificial intelligence, algorithmic curation, how that shapes our perceptions, and maybe even our willingness to speak freely in digital spaces. So it's really a mission to understand the multifaceted ways in which we and society define and enforce goodness, and critically, what we might be losing in that process. We're asking questions like, how effective are Jung's ideas, shadow integration, persona awareness as resilience strategies against these pressures? And what are the real socio-political consequences of this widespread internalized thought control, this self-deception on democratic health, on civic engagement, particularly in the West? And finally, what's the role of AI and algorithms? Are they making this Orwellian paradox of goodness worse, or could they potentially mitigate it? How do they shape perception, self-censorship, and even that Jungian persona online? The Inner Censor, Jungian persona, shadow, and self-deception.
Okay, let's start by digging into this idea of the good person that really kicked off our deep dive. We all do it, right? We have this version of ourselves we present to the world, especially, at work or in social settings. What's actually going on beneath that surface?
Yeah, and this immediately brings Carl Jung's concept of the persona to mind. Think of it not just as a mask, like a simple disguise, but more like the specific social role we adopt. It's shaped by how we want others to see us, definitely, but also by what society expects from us in that role. It's directly tied to what Jung called our conscious attitude, our overall cosmovision, or modus operandi, which is essentially the sum total of our belief system, our core values, our individual biases even, and how we filter and interpret everything around us. Like imagine two people looking at the same stormy sky. One sees terror, destruction, maybe their cosmovision is rooted in scarcity or fear. The other sees power, cleansing, renewal. Perhaps their worldview is rooted in abundance or hope. Same sky, totally different reality based on that internal filter. And we consciously, or sometimes unconsciously, craft this persona. It's the professional you, the friendly neighbor, the dutiful son or daughter. It's the identity we use to navigate the social world, making sure we fit in, meet those expectations. And the fascinating bit is how much of that crafting is driven by this almost subconscious desire for acceptance, which, brings us right back to your friend's email.
Right, so if that's the part we're deliberately showing, the polished version. What happens to all the other bits, the messy parts, the inconvenient ones, maybe even the parts we think are not so good, that don't quite fit that persona we built.
That's exactly where Jung's idea of the shadow comes in. And it's crucial to understand, contrary to how it often sounds, the shadow isn't inherently evil or negative. Jung was clear it's neutral. It basically holds everything that we've repressed and neglected or simply left undeveloped within us. And yes, that includes traits we might see as undesirable, maybe aggression, selfishness, envy. But, and this is key, it also includes our hidden talents, our raw creativity, untapped potential, even things like joy or spontaneity that we might have pushed down, maybe because they didn't fit our persona or society's narrow idea of goodness or professionalism. Jung actually argued that the real challenge in psychological growth often isn't just confronting the negative stuff. It's accepting the good qualities hidden in our shadow, the unlived life, as he sometimes called it, aspirations, desires, abilities we shoved aside. And it's worth remembering, some aspects of the unconscious, well, they were never conscious to begin with, they just reside there. And then there's the whole layer of the collective unconscious too, influencing us with these deep archetypal patterns.
That's really interesting, the idea that the shadow has positive potential too. So if we keep these parts of ourselves hidden away in the shadow realm, how does that actually impact us? Almost without us realizing it. How does it bubble up?
Well, that's where complexes step onto the stage. They're like the dynamic engines of the unconscious. Jung described them as autonomous psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies. Think of them almost like puppet masters within our own psyche. That's a good analogy. They're these emotionally charged networks of ideas, images, feelings that have been repressed or neglected, and because they're charged, they can really distort how we see reality. They shape our sense of identity by producing these fixed narratives, these stories that just play on repeat in our minds, often unconsciously. So, for example, an inferiority complex might constantly whisper, "You're not good enough, you don't matter." And that leads to this repetitive storyline of self-doubt, maybe underachievement, even when there's clear evidence you are capable. These aren't just abstract ideas. They're deeply ingrained patterns, thought, emotion, behavior, operating largely outside our conscious control. And they often cluster around archetypes like a mother complex or a father complex, tapping into universal human stuff, but always expressed uniquely in each person.
Wow. Puppet masters, that's a strong image. It really sounds like these complexes can take over sometimes, making us act in ways that feel almost foreign or totally out of character. How can you spot when these puppet masters are pulling your strings?
You're spot on. Because complexes are unconscious, and crucially, they have no relationship with the ego, our conscious sense of I. They can absolutely feel like a foreign body pulling the strings. It can show up as these disproportionate overreactions to, well, seemingly minor things, or suddenly feeling intensely triggered by a comment that seems pretty innocuous on the surface, or finding yourself engaging in compulsive behaviors that seem to come out of nowhere, maybe even contradicting what you consciously want or intend. Jung even observed that in really severe cases of dissociation, people might genuinely believe an outside spirit is controlling them. But psychologically, from his perspective, it's often an autonomous complex that's taken the wheel. And these complexes, they create narratives, like the victim mentality, which can be a real barrier to growth. Because if you're always finding someone else to blame, you're externalizing responsibility, right? You never have to look at your own part. Someone deep in that victim role might even subtly romanticize their own suffering, feel it makes them special, and might unconsciously sabotage things that could actually help them grow because maybe deep down they don't want to give up the perceived benefits like sympathy or avoiding accountability. They can even become quite tyrannical towards others, ironically, all while skillfully avoiding responsibility for their own choices.
So these internal dynamics, these puppet masters, they don't just stay inside. They color how we see the world, and especially other people. How does that projection actually work in our relationships?
Precisely. Complexes are the psychological engine behind our projections. The outer world often becomes a mirror reflecting our inner dynamics. We unconsciously seek out people and situations that allow us to perpetuate these fixed narratives the complex demands. For instance, someone with an unresolved rejection complex might find themselves repeatedly drawn to emotionally unavailable partners. Or they might sabotage relationships just as they start getting serious and intimate. Why? Because that familiar, painful narrative of rejection is what their complex knows and unconsciously seeks to reinforce. You can often spot projections when you find yourself seeing someone in very black and white terms, they're all good or all bad, or reducing them to a single label, like calling someone a narcissist based on one interaction, or putting someone on an impossibly high pedestal as a flawless spiritual master. Other signs. Feeling this compulsive need to either show your superiority or constantly downplay their achievements when you're around them. Or changing your own behavior significantly to fit what you think they expect. Feeling like their opinions matter way more than your own. Or getting intensely frustrated when they don't live up to the idealized or demonized image you've created. A really powerful sign is feeling this deep, almost obsessive compulsion towards someone. Jungian psychology might call that a severe animus or anima entanglement, where you're projecting this idealized inner masculine or feminine image onto them. Or it could be limerence, that involuntary state of intense romantic obsession, which is also driven heavily by projection. Think back to your friend with the email. If she had a strong, good team player complex, she might unconsciously project her own suppressed directness onto others. seeing anyone who is direct as aggressive or unprofessional. That's how our hidden parts literally shape the world we perceive. B, resilience through shadow integration, beyond intellectualizing. Okay, so how do we deal with this? The core insight for truly integrating the shadow, for making peace with these complexes, isn't just about understanding. It's about transforming our perception of what's been repressed. And, this is crucial, giving these hidden aspects a more mature, conscious expression through concrete actions. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's not about endlessly digging into the past, like psychoanalysis sometimes gets characterized. Understanding the origins of our patterns, what Freud called etiology, the why is important, yes, it's half the equation. But Jung, influenced by Adler, brought in the concept of teleology, which asks, what purpose does this behavior or even non-behavior serve now? So we need to understand not just why we repressed something, like that musical talent, but also what are we trying to achieve by not expressing it now? What secondary gains, maybe comfort or avoiding risk, are we clinging to?
Right, so it's not just about navel-gazing about the past, it's about actively changing our present actions. What does this integration actually look like for someone who realizes, wow, I've suppressed a really significant part of myself, like a dream or a talent?
Let's stick with that example. Someone who always wanted to be a musician but never pursued it. Maybe parental expectations, maybe self-doubt, maybe fear of failure. Understanding why they repressed it, the etiology, maybe the toxic shame they felt for wanting something unconventional, that's vital for challenging those old limiting beliefs. But it's only half the story. The other half, the teleology, asks what they're trying to achieve by not pursuing music now. Perhaps they're avoiding the responsibility that comes with pursuing a passion. It takes work, dedication. Or maybe they're just clinging to a familiar, safe, albeit unfulfilling comfort zone, terrified of failure, or maybe even terrified of success and what that might demand. So true integration isn't just having the insight, it means making dedicated time now to play music, to compose, to take classes, maybe even perform if that's part of it. It's about the doing, taking concrete steps, often following your fear rather than avoiding it, developing intrinsic motivation, doing it for the love of it, not just external validation. It's about fully living your life, bringing those unconscious potentials into conscious, embodied reality. This isn't just about endlessly analyzing past traumas, it's practical changes. And the amazing thing is, the shadow, when we consciously engage with it like this, it holds the key. The key to uncovering hidden genius, building real confidence, fostering healthier relationships, and ultimately achieving a deeper, more authentic sense of meaning in life.
That feels like a much more proactive approach. A shift from passive reflection to active engagement. It really does sound like this isn't just abstract psych theory, but a genuine roadmap for building personal resilience, especially when life throws challenges our way.
Absolutely. And this transformative approach, it's deeply supported by established psychological frameworks. It's not just Jung floating out there alone. Think about post-traumatic growth, PTG. That's the whole idea that profound suffering or trauma doesn't have to break us. It can actually become a catalyst for enhanced personal strength, maybe spiritual awakening, a renewed sense of purpose, finding meaning in the wound, not despite it. It also aligns beautifully with self-determination theory, SDT, which emphasizes our fundamental psychological needs: autonomy, feeling in control, competence, feeling capable, and relatedness, feeling connected. These aren't just nice to haves. SDT argues they're essential for psychological well-being. And things like purposeful isolation, skill development, rebuilding relationships, they feed directly into these needs. It also involves deep cognitive reframing, actively reinterpreting past pain in empowering ways, and constructing a new, empowering narrative identity, basically rewriting your life story to include themes of growth, resilience, redemption, overcoming adversity. It's about building a holistic framework from both the pain and the purpose. Turning lead into gold, like the alchemists aim to do.
That's incredibly powerful. And you mentioned we found a real-world example of this. Someone who truly embodies this kind of resilient self-actualization.
Yes, absolutely. Pavan Shakarbinder's story and his Havani theory of resilient self-actualization, it's a remarkable living testament to this entire process. He was born with a 75% physical disability, faced immense underestimation, discrimination from society, schools, workplaces, even within his own family structure sometimes. He talks about deep fracture points and psychological scars, emotional betrayals, experiences that could easily have locked him into a lifelong victim narrative. But instead, he developed this theory, visualized as a pyramid, outlining 5 progressive stages that moved him from that potential victimhood to a life of profound purpose and contribution. The first stage is acknowledgement of reality without victimhood. This involved a really brutal but necessary shift from asking why me to asking what now. It meant owning his story, the disability, the challenges, without letting it define or imprison him. It required both brutal honesty about his circumstances and gentle self-compassion for the pain involved. He found that just acknowledging the suffering without blaming or succumbing to self-pity was that essential first step towards liberation. Second stage, purposeful isolation and recalibration. This was a critical period, he says, of inner detox, reevaluation. He systematically removed false relationships, negative influences, the external noise, and really turned inward to listen to his authentic self. He discovered that solitude, far from being a punishment, was actually where the soul could detox, heal, and recalibrate its internal compass. It sounds a bit like the hero's journey archetype, where the hero has to withdraw to find inner strength. Third, skill transmutation and creative rebirth. This is where he actively channeled his past pain, his challenges, into fuel. Fuel for technological innovations, particularly in voice tech and AI cognition. Fuel for passionate advocacy for disability rights. Fuel for deep metaphysical studies. His groundbreaking work began to mirror his inner evolution. He saw his disability not as a limitation, but almost as an amplifier for unique gifts and insights. He literally transmuted personal suffering into a force for positive change. That's alchemy right there. Fourth stage, spiritual anchoring and love-based reconstruction. This involves connecting to something larger than oneself, whether you call it God, higher purpose, dharma, legacy. Finding that anchor. And for him, a pivotal moment was meeting his true love, Julia Oris. He describes this as a profound catalyst for even deeper spiritual awakening. This stage emphasizes that spiritual grounding and authentic love aren't luxuries. They're necessities for the resilient soul to truly rebuild and thrive. And finally, the fifth stage, at the apex, contribution and legacy. This is where he transforms his incredibly arduous journey into a lantern for others through prolific public speaking, writing, his ongoing work in AI and tech policy. And he has this great line, "The phoenix doesn't ask for permission." Which is just the ultimate expression of breaking free, isn't it? Free from internal and external cages, not waiting for external validation to rise and pursue his purpose. His story is just such a powerful testament. You don't need a perfect life to live a meaningful one. You need that unyielding inner fire, the courage to live your authentic truth, disabilities and all. 2, the external censor, societal pressures, thought control, and manufactured consent.
That's a truly profound personal journey of overcoming internal and external cages. Now, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, that struggle to be authentic, that pressure to be the good person, it isn't just an internal psychological battle, is it? It's profoundly influenced by these external forces, especially how information is controlled, how narratives get shaped in society.
Absolutely. And that brings us directly to Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's foundational work, Manufacturing Consent. What's really striking is how many analysts, how many sources are saying this book is even more relevant today than when it first came out back in 1988. Why? Well, largely because media concentration hasn't slowed down, it's accelerated. Fewer and fewer corporations control vast swaths of information, print, broadcast, and now, critically, digital. This consolidation means a smaller number of incredibly powerful entities can shape public narratives, frame debates, and influence opinions with unprecedented efficiency, much like Chomsky and Herman outlined, but may be turbocharged by technology. And remember, it's not just about what's explicitly said. It's often more about what's left out, what's emphasized, what's framed as normal or acceptable.
Yeah, I vividly remember the early days of the internet. It was hailed as this amazing democratizing force, wasn't it? A way to decentralize information, empower individuals, break free from those traditional media gatekeepers. What on earth happened to that vision?
It's a pretty sobering question, isn't it? The initial promise, the dream, was that the internet would be this impenetrable hedge against new media consolidation, an open web of information exchange that would push power back to the people, a kind of digital Wild West of free thought. But as the analysis suggests, what happened was the same monopolists took over the internet and implemented the same old media models. They systematically created these walled gardens everywhere. Think about social media platforms, app stores, even things like academic journal paywalls. They make it harder to share information freely, harder to access scientific research without paying hefty fees, harder to read news outside of curated algorithmic feeds. So in essence, the argument goes, they kind of killed the internet before it was even born. They transformed what was supposed to be this free open space into a meticulously controlled environment, where access to information and who gets to disseminate it is tightly regulated. And this allows for a level of control over public consciousness, over what we see and think, that maybe even Chomsky couldn't have fully foreseen back in the analog age.
So it's not just the usual suspects, the traditional news outlets, manufacturing consent now, it's the tech giants themselves. And we're caught in this information ecosystem where, where we are the product being sold.
Precisely. Companies like Google, Apple, X, formerly Twitter, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, they now wield complete control over public discourse and propaganda, according to some critics. Their core business model, as one sharp comment put it, isn't really about giving you a search engine or a social network. It's about monetizing you. Google's product isn't the search engine, it's you. They make money by selling access to privileged user groups, that's us, to advertisers, our attention, our clicks, our preferences, our data, that's the real commodity being traded. And the insidious part is that the very anonymity social media offers can, paradoxically, lead to new, even more effective ways to propagandize.
You mentioned studies suggesting maybe 25% of Instagram users are bot farms. These automated accounts can artificially amplify certain viewpoints, create a false sense of consensus, drown out genuine dissenting voices, or just sow chaos and discord. It makes it increasingly difficult for anyone to distinguish between authentic public conversation and carefully manufactured narratives. It's like an invisible hand shaping our perception, often without us even realizing it.
That's a powerful and frankly pretty unsettling thought. How does this pervasive control actually show up? Can we see concrete examples we might recognize?
Well, Chomsky's original propaganda model, with its filters, ownership, advertising, sources, flack, and ideology, it still applies, just maybe in updated forms. Think about major events. The lead up to the Iraq War is often cited, or maybe the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. In both cases, critics argue, the mainstream media largely amplified official government narratives without enough independent critical inquiry or giving significant airtime to dissenting perspectives. There's this persistent feeling, isn't there, that sometimes the media is just reporting what the government is saying, which, as one source pointed out, isn't journalism, that's public relations. A free press is supposed to scrutinize claims, question sources, provide context, dig deeper, not just relay official statements, even from intelligence agencies, as established fact. Historically, a dominant filter might have been anti-communism. Now, maybe anti-terrorism has faded somewhat as the primary justification, but the underlying mechanisms for shaping narratives remain incredibly potent. Some argue it shifts towards a broader anti-socialism sentiment, or even just a general promotion of positive energy messages. Anything too critical or negative might get subtly downplayed or filtered out. This is how the public can be gently conditioned to accept certain realities, certain policies, even when they might conflict with their own experiences or values. It subtly defines the boundaries of acceptable thought. Be China's multi-layered censorship system, a case study in control. Now, if you want to see a really highly evolved, complex system of external thought control in action, looking at China provides a stark case study. Research details this incredibly intricate, multi-layered mechanism of internet censorship and governance. It's meticulously designed to control public engagement, manage dissent, and ultimately protect elites. And this system hasn't stood still. It's dramatically increased in scope and scale over the past decade. Surveillance and ideological control now extend across virtually all digital platforms: Weibo, WeChat, live streaming, even private messaging apps. It's a truly pervasive ecosystem of digital control.
Wow, multi-layered and pervasive. That sounds incredibly comprehensive. What are these specific layers of control that ordinary citizens might encounter day to day?
Well, first, and maybe most powerfully, there's self-censorship. It's incredibly effective because it gets internalized. Individuals voluntarily, constantly evaluate and moderate what they post online. Why? Because there's this pervasive sense of surveillance, this acute awareness that, as one person put it, you never know when what you post might be brought to light. It's not just fear of direct punishment, though that's there. It's also this constant, exhausting calculation of risk, given how broad and deliberately vague the definition of sensitive content can be. So people tend towards three main options. First, adopted by almost everyone interviewed, is simply withdrawal or silence. Believing it is useless to speak, feeling the authorities do not care about the voices from the grassroots anymore. The second option is careful moderation, painstakingly modifying their words, using coded language, trying to make the content less sensitive before hitting post, walking that tightrope. And the third, which is rarer but significant, is candid expression, but often using throwaway accounts to minimize risk. Some even see getting banned as a kind of honor, their logic. If the authorities are afraid of people knowing the truth, then we are doing the right thing to post. It becomes a defiant badge.
So people are actively censoring themselves before the system even needs to step in. That's powerful. What about the platforms themselves? How do they enforce these controls?
That's the crucial second layer, platform censorship. This relies heavily on automated blocking and filtering, driven by massive, constantly updated lists of sensitive keywords. A former social media manager mentioned it would astonish people if these platforms released banned words just because of the sheer volume and, sometimes, the seemingly illogical connections. Their operational logic is brutally simple. Better to be wrong than miss. Filter first, ask questions later, if at all. For instance, a simple phrase expressing hope the night will pass and the dawn will come was reportedly blocked on Weibo once. Why? Because the keyword nightclub was on the banned list. It shows the rigidity, the occasional absurdity of automated filtering. But this automated process isn't foolproof, so it's continuously reinforced and refined by armies of human censors. These human censors can understand nuance, sarcasm, irony, evolving slang, all the ways users try to get around the filters. They adapt to the circumvention tactics. And critically, all platforms operating in China are legally responsible for the content they host. This creates an enormous incentive for them to enforce strict moderation, to avoid crippling penalties or losing their license to operate. They become active, necessary participants in the state's censorship apparatus.
Okay, so self-censorship, platform censorship. And then, beyond the digital world, there's the most direct and, I imagine, intimidating form of control.
Yes, absolutely. Physical enforcement is the indispensable complement to all the digital controls. It serves both as a powerful deterrent and a method of reinforcement when digital measures fail or aren't enough. This involves real-world actions against individuals. It can range from warnings and reprimands, maybe a chat over tea with security officials, all the way to police visits, formal arrests, interrogations, and even imprisonment for online speech. We heard examples like a journalist being visited by local police just for forwarding a message about potential vaccine side effects, another person reprimanded for complaining online about strict pandemic quarantine policies, and police directly inspecting people's mobile phones for content related to protests, like the A4 blank paper movement in 2022. One person noted that was the first time I've encountered censorship through direct mobile phone inspections, signaling an escalation in invasiveness. These actions, even if informal, often become known within communities. They signal the state's seriousness, effectively instilling this pervasive climate of fear. And that fear, of course, circles back and fuels even more self-censorship and withdrawal from public discourse online. The threat of real-world consequences makes the digital cage feel very solid.
Given all these layers, the self-censorship, the platforms, the physical threat, it makes me wonder, where exactly is the line, the boundary between what's allowed and what's forbidden? Is it clear to people living under this system?
That's one of the most insidious aspects. The line is deliberately kept vague and shifting. Interestingly, in the study we looked at, all 22 interviewees claimed they knew the boundary. But when asked to define it, their answers varied wildly. Older participants, say over 55, tended to focus on explicitly political content, criticizing top leaders, or mentioning national governmental guidelines. That was the clear red line for them. Younger people, 18 to 30, had a much broader understanding of sensitive topics. It wasn't just high politics. It included things like feminism, LGBTQ+ rights, historical events like Tiananmen Square, or anything that countered the official state narrative on current events. One young person noted, images of two men, even if just a somewhat intimate post, are instantly deleted, showing how broad the net can be cast. The middle group, 31 to 55, seemed the most flexible, aware of how sensitivities evolve, and often had more direct personal experiences of warnings for unknowingly crossing these shifting lines. This pervasive vagueness, this lack of clear rules, it inevitably leads to what's called overly self-censored behavior. Because if you don't know exactly where the line is, you err on the side of extreme caution, right?
Yeah.
You censor yourself far more than might technically be necessary. As one person said after their WeChat account got blocked, they only tell you that you are breaking the rules, but they can't tell you exactly what the rules are. Oh, this lack of transparency is a powerful control mechanism in itself. It incentivizes people to self-censor even potentially innocuous content, stifling public discourse, creativity, and dissent far more effectively than explicit rules ever could. It creates a chilling effect that people internalize. The censor moves inside your head.
It sounds exhausting. But despite this pervasive control, people aren't just passively accepting it, are they? You mentioned circumvention tactics. How do they try to push back, get their voices heard, or share information?
They get incredibly creative and innovative. Netizens employ this diverse toolkit of circumvention tactics. It really is an ongoing cat-and-mouse game, as you said. The most common tactic is probably wordplay, cleverly leveraging the unique features of the Chinese language. This includes using homophones, words that sound the same but have different meanings. The classic example is river crab, 20 hexu, which sounds like harmony, hexu. Harmony became official code for censorship, so river crab became ironic code for censorship itself. They use initialisms from pinyin, the romanization system, like Waids for Yingyin Deshen, meaning eternal god or goat, often used ironically or to praise something the state might disapprove of. They create coded words, establishing the shared lexicon within online communities for sensitive meanings that outsiders or automated censors will likely miss. They also engage in language playing, mixing Chinese characters with English letters, Japanese or Korean script, or using what's called Martian language, Fengrongwen, using non-standard characters, symbols, breaking up words, anything to make it harder for algorithms to recognize banned terms. The linguistic gymnastics are truly impressive. Okay, second major category, visualization. This is all about converting text into visual formats, exploiting the fact that censorship algorithms are still primarily text-focused, though image recognition is catching up. Simple screenshots are common. Creating images where the text is embedded is another way. But to counter the increasingly sophisticated OCR, optical character recognition, and human sensors, users get more advanced. They might rotate the image 180 degrees, strategically place watermarks over key characters to disrupt recognition, or create exceptionally long images. One interviewee reported creating a 1-meter-long image just to share sensitive text, forcing human sensors to scroll endlessly or potentially miss parts of the message. This visual evasion shows real ingenuity. Third, they use decontextualization and recontextualization. This is a really clever tactic. They take sensitive topics or critiques and transform them into allegories or parables. They strip them of their immediate real-world context and re-embed them in fictional settings, maybe historical ones, or just vague narratives. This allows for criticism of high-profile figures, maybe celebrities, maybe even veiled references to government officials without directly naming names or stating the forbidden topic explicitly. As one person said, allegorical stories set against the backdrop of their situations are quite popular online. It enables people to express dissent indirectly, often with plausible deniability, speaking truth in coded stories. Fourth, using throwaway accounts, temporary, disposable online profiles, is a very common tactic for discussing highly sensitive topics. It minimizes the risk of identification. This anonymity empowers netizens, allowing them to freely express myself without the fear of being identified. It lets them push the boundaries of discussable content without directly linking that potentially risky speech back to their main identifiable online presence. It's a calculated risk taken for freedom of expression. And finally, using external drive links to cloud storage services like Baidu Cloud or others. This allows sensitive content, maybe banned articles, videos, documents, to bypass direct internet censorship controls on the platforms themselves. Even if the social media post containing the link gets deleted, the content itself remains accessible to anyone who managed to grab the link before it disappeared. This creates these resilient, distributed information networks that are much less susceptible to complete interruption by the censors. Information, once shared this way, can persist even after active censorship efforts. So yeah, it truly is this ongoing cat and mouse game. Users find a loophole, the state and platforms patch it, users find another one. Both sides continuously innovate their strategies. Citizens are constantly finding new cracks in that digital wall. C, elite disconnection, the privilege of control. Now, here's a really revealing contrast. While ordinary citizens are locked in this constant struggle to stay connected, to make their voices visible despite the censorship, elites are often perceived as using these very same mechanisms to disconnect themselves from public scrutiny and accountability. This highlights a profound disparity, almost a two-tiered system, in how internet censorship actually operates on the ground.
So censorship isn't just a top-down state tool for controlling the masses. It can also be leveraged by the privileged within the system to shield themselves.
Precisely. Elites employ several disconnecting tactics to protect themselves from online threats like doxing, having personal information released online, or public backlash when they face scandals. One tactic is self-anonymization, basically deliberately deleting their online traces after a public incident blows up. A famous example was the hashtag driving into the Palace Museum incident in 2020. Photos emerged of luxury cars parked inside the Forbidden City, a huge symbol of privilege and rule-breaking. Once the individuals involved were doxxed by public outrage online, they quickly deleted all their posts on Weibo, trying to erase their digital footprint and control the narrative. It's not just about privacy, it's damage control. But more powerfully, elites can leverage sophisticated crisis management teams. These PR firms or internal teams contact social media platforms directly. They have the connections and influence to persuade platforms to take specific actions. Ban keywords related to their client scandal, shadow ban users who are critical, making their posts invisible to others without them knowing, remove relevant hashtags from the trending list so the story dies down. As one interviewee stated very bluntly, the celebrities team will report to Douban, a popular review site, requesting to delete the posts or block the group discussion, whereas normal people do not have that power. This is just a stark illustration of unequal access to control over information flow. It's a powerful mechanism for manufacturing consent where negative stories about elites can simply vanish from public view. Even organized fan groups can act like informal crisis management, flooding platforms with positive messages to drown out criticism, effectively controlling the narrative around a celebrity or public figure.
That's a chilling picture. Unequal access to the delete button, almost. Like a digital caste system where some can curate their reality much more effectively.
It absolutely has that feel. Elites also use legal measures. Filing lawsuits for privacy invasion or defamation can deter doxing and compel individuals or even platforms to retract or delete critical information. While legal threats can act as a deterrent, as one person noted, it's not always possible to identify a specific individual behind anonymous online criticism, so it's a powerful tool, but not foolproof. And finally, sometimes the best tactic is just silence or adopting a deliberately low-key approach. This involves simply letting controversies fade away naturally, hoping the news cycle moves on, or maybe strategically responding at odd hours, like midnight, to minimize immediate public attention, as the Palace Museum reportedly did after that driving incident. The logic is, don't engage, don't give the controversy more oxygen. However, this low-key approach can seriously backfire. If the public feels ignored or dismissed, it can actually escalate popular resistance, leading to more collective action, more attention on the negative story. It can turn a controllable issue into a much bigger crisis of legitimacy. But taken together, all these tactics clearly demonstrate an elite privilege. The privilege to curate their digital presence, suppress critical voices, and maintain a carefully constructed public persona, very much like the individual psychological persona we talked about earlier, but wielded with real social and economic power.
Okay, this is a really important question then, almost a paradox, given everything we've heard about the control. Is there any actual acceptance of censorship within the population itself? Do people in China, generally speaking, believe it's necessary?
Surprisingly, perhaps, the answer seems to be yes, to a significant extent. In the study we examined, 19 out of the 22 interviewees actually stated they believed internet censorship was necessary. This belief was particularly strong among the older participants. They often had a longer history with state narratives, maybe experienced more tumultuous periods, and tended to frame censorship as key for spreading positive energy and, crucially, maintaining national stability. They were more accustomed to the official discourse, the constant reminders from authorities or even neighbors to be sunshine, positive, and to not get involved in politics or social hotspots. Just keep your head down. This really highlights a powerful form of discourse-driven control, where the public internalizes the state's justifications for censorship and comes to see it as beneficial, or at least a necessary evil for societal harmony, even if the rules remain frustratingly vague. But it's crucial to add, this acceptance exists alongside the palpable anger and frustration of others, often younger individuals, or those who've personally experienced the sharp end of censorship. People who've been shadow banned, had accounts permanently blocked, making their voices invisible, or those who've been reprimanded just for sharing information that was later deemed sensitive. So it's definitely not a monolithic acceptance. It's this complex interplay of internalized belief, pragmatic caution, learned helplessness, perhaps, and also simmering resentment and resistance. Third, societal impact, democratic health, and civic engagement in Western democracies.
Okay, we've journeyed through the internal landscape of the psyche with Jung, looking at self-censorship and the persona. Then we examine these powerful external forces, manufactured consent, state censorship systems like China's. Now let's pivot and try to connect all this to the health and functioning of democratic institutions, particularly thinking about Western societies now. How are these dynamics, widespread self-censorship, the pressure to conform, maybe the feeling of being watched or managed online, how is this impacting the very fabric of civic engagement?
That's a really crucial connection to make because the context is also changing dramatically in the West. What's fascinating is how broader societal shifts, things like individualization, globalization, secularization, have profoundly restructured why people get involved civically and how they do it. We're living in what one scholar, echoing the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, calls a liquid time. What does that mean? It means our ties to traditional, stable structures, think political parties, trade unions, maybe even religious organizations, are loosening significantly. They don't hold the same sway they once did. There's often a perceived lack of definite political moral rationales, or those big emotionally charged political ideologies that mobilized previous generations for collective action seem less potent now. People are increasingly freed from traditional constraints, which sounds good, but it also leads to this much stronger focus on individual reflection, self-realization, and an almost overwhelming array of personal choices. And that focus on the individual can, paradoxically, make sustained collective action feel harder to organize and maintain. It's like that river metaphor again. The banks have dissolved, and the water flows everywhere, often in disconnected streams.
Okay, this liquid reality, let's unpack that a bit more. How is civic engagement actually changing on the ground in practical terms? What are the new trends that really stand out?
We're seeing a pretty fundamental shift in patterns. There's a definite move away from primarily face-to-face interaction within long-lasting, stable civic groups, like, say, joining the Rotary Club for decades, towards more mediated interaction, often online, within fluctuating, sometimes very short-lived networks. Think of Facebook group for a specific local issue that dissolves once the issue is resolved. Engagement is also becoming more consumer-based rather than purely value-based, meaning people might participate based on perceived personal benefit, convenience, or what they can get out of it. Things like networking opportunities, skills development, or something good to put on a resume rather than solely driven by deep, long-term ideological commitment. It's also shifting away from diffuse horizontal involvement where everyone in a group might be equally engaged over time, towards more centrally coordinated activities, often driven by a small core group, or even direct, disintermediated engagement that bypasses traditional civic structures altogether. Think about signing a viral online petition, joining a flash mob protest organized via social media, or donating directly to a cause online rather than attending years of local committee meetings. It's a clear transition from what we might label traditional classical forms of participation towards modern new forms, reflecting that broader societal move from collectivistic to more individualistic approaches, from long-term membership to short-term projects, from regular involvement to more episodic, targeted engagement. Youth engagement, a paradox of participation. And this profound shift, it's particularly pronounced among young people, let's say defined here as roughly 14 to 25 years old. Their connections, their affiliations to those traditional institutions and structures are loosening even more significantly than for older generations. There's often a perceived lack of structural incentives for them to join these older forms. And as we mentioned, they often lack those emotionally loaded political ideologies or the frameworks of those big collective movements, civil rights, anti-war that really galvanize past generations. Now, this isn't necessarily a failing on their part. It likely reflects a changed socio-political landscape where grand narratives are often viewed with more skepticism, perhaps rightly so.
That's a really important distinction. So if young people aren't engaging in those classic ways, joining parties, voting maybe as much, how are they engaging? Where is their civic energy actually going?
Oh, they are absolutely engaging, just very differently. While they might be less interested in formally joining established organizations or maybe less consistent in turning out for elections, they are deeply involved in what are called these new forms of civic action. This includes a huge amount of voluntary work, informal political action, like grassroots organizing online or offline, awareness-raising campaigns, especially using social media, altruistic acts within their communities, general social participation, and they readily use direct channels, contacting officials directly via email or social media, engaging with mass media, maybe creating their own media, signing petitions, which are huge, boycotting products or companies whose values they oppose, canvassing for specific causes they believe in, participating in protests both online and offline, and actively persuading others within their own networks. Studies, for instance, looking at Norwegian youth, show they're especially eager to jump into these new, often digitally enabled forms of engagement. It seems to be a global trend. They are not disengaged, they are perhaps re-engaged in different ways.
So it really is this paradox then. We might see headlines about lower youth voter turnout in many places, but we absolutely should not interpret that as a lack of political interest or engagement among young people.
Exactly right. That's a crucial takeaway. Young people today often just aren't convinced that traditional voting is the most effective or the most direct way to create change. Or maybe they feel their individual vote won't make a significant difference in a complex, sometimes unresponsive system. So their absence from the polls, while statistically true in some cases, really shouldn't be read as apathy or lack of political knowledge. In fact, surveys often suggest they are surprisingly politically informed, maybe even more so than previous generations in some ways, even if their methods of engagement differ. As one scholar put it very nicely, the simultaneity of civic engagement and civic disengagement is not necessarily a contradiction, for both are possible. You can be disengaged from formal politics but highly engaged civically. The real problem, the snag, is that these new forms of participation, the online activism, the boycotts, the awareness campaigns, are often rarely valued as legitimate acts of civic engagement. They're often dismissed by social scientists sticking to old metrics, by policymakers, perhaps by older generations who expect engagement to look like it did in their youth. And this profound undervaluation is dangerous. It leads to a misunderstanding of the true level of youth participation and potentially to this misinterpretation of youth apathy, when really it's just a different kind of engagement. It's like, as the saying goes, judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
And this episodic engagement, you mentioned this short-term, goal-oriented participation, that sounds like a defining feature of this modern liquid era, maybe stretching beyond just youth.
It really does seem to be. This engagement is often short-term, focused on achieving a specific goal, targeted towards a particular project or campaign, rather than being tied to a broad, long-term organizational agenda or requiring ongoing membership commitments. It's about achieving specific, often immediate effects, which might explain why younger generations, perhaps more accustomed to instant feedback and the pace of digital life, might favor things like consumer boycotts, flash protests, or viral social media campaigns over the slower, more deliberative processes of traditional political participation. Now, while we see this pattern increasingly across all age groups in Western democracies, it seems to be predominantly taking root among these younger cohorts first. They've grown up with digital activism as a norm. This suggests that really studying youth engagement isn't just about understanding young people. It offers invaluable insights into broader emerging trends and how individuals participate in civil society. It might even forecast future developments in the political economy, because the features of youth engagement and this episodic, project-based style are almost perfectly aligned. It feels like the shape of things to come. See the internet's role, reinforcing existing patterns. Now, of course, the internet was initially seen as the game changer for civic engagement, especially for young people who are obviously the heaviest users of online technologies. The prevailing belief, the hope, was that its inherently flexible hypertextual network structure, combined with its alternative, even anarchic feel, would naturally foster online democratic problem solving. The idea was it would effortlessly extend offline social capital, our real-world connections and trust, into this truly tolerant worldwide digital community, a kind of utopia of civic participation.
Yeah, that was a dream. But what's fascinating here is that the reality seems to have turned out, well, a bit more nuanced, maybe even disappointing, compared to that initial utopian vision.
Indeed. The reality is definitely far more complex. While the internet's structure, its potential for decentralized anti-authoritarian action, should theoretically resonate strongly with young people and new forms of engagement, study after study actually shows that their general use of internet hasn't significantly increased overall civic participation across the board. It hasn't magically turned non-participants into active citizens en masse. Instead, the internet seems to function primarily as a tool, as an extension, a catalyst, and a reproducer of offline patterns of young people's civic engagement. What that means is, online engagement largely mirrors and reinforces the social and civic behaviors, and crucially, the divides that already exist offline. It doesn't seem to be creating entirely new patterns of participation or, importantly, mobilizing large numbers of the previously disengaged. It's like adding a powerful engine to a car that's already on a specific track. It doesn't necessarily change the car's destination, it just makes it go faster along the path it was already on.
Okay, so if I'm getting this right, online social networks, things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they don't really create new civic communities from scratch so much as they mostly replicate and amplify what's already happening offline.
Precisely. They are definitely fixtures of youth culture, no doubt about that. But research suggests they are used primarily as extensions of existing offline friendships and established peer groups. Now, they do effectively lower the barriers for self-directed learning and interest-driven participation, but mainly for those who are already interested and motivated in civic activities. For those individuals, online tools are great. They allow them to deepen their understanding of issues, enhance their sense of in-group spirit and solidarity, and serve as a really accessible platform for developing and expressing these project-based political identities. This definitely fosters internal group trust and boosts feelings of personal efficacy within those existing networks. However, the evidence suggests they haven't been particularly successful in mobilizing the truly disengaged those who lack strong offline civic ties or motivations to begin with. Nor have they proven widely effective yet in fostering broad online democratic problem-solving that bridges different groups, or in building cooperation with those outside the immediate, often like-minded group. In essence, online social capital tends to reproduce and often strengthen existing offline social capital, rather than creating new cross-cutting bonds or bridging social and ideological divides. It can become a powerful echo chamber for reinforcing existing beliefs and connections.
Okay, given that, what really drives this kind of engagement then, whether it's happening online or offline? What's the core motivation, especially for young people, to get involved in the first place?
Well, interestingly, research suggests that for young people, egoistic motivations, basically, self-interested reasons play a surprisingly pivotal role, often more so than purely altruistic ones. This includes career reasoning, often explicitly described as resume padding, getting volunteering experience or skills to look good for college applications or future job prospects. And related to that, a strong desire to gain practical skills, communication, organizational abilities, fundraising, maybe technical skills related to online campaigns. Beyond those tangible benefits, personal development is a huge driver. The chance for esteem enhancement, feeling good about yourself, fulfilling social concerns, connecting with peers, even sensation-seeking, the excitement of being involved in something, and a sense of reciprocity giving back to a community or cause that has helped them. But perhaps most significantly, civic engagement becomes this really crucial opportunity for identity work. This involves deep reflection on their own values, trying to formulate some ethical consistency in their lives, developing a sense of community and belonging that becomes part of their identity, and also rigorously testing their personal abilities and capabilities in a relatively safe haven where the risks of failure might feel less immediate or consequential than in, say, a formal job. This identity work is particularly potent during adolescence and young adulthood, when people are actively figuring out who they are, what they stand for, and finding their place in the wider world. Civic engagement becomes a key arena for building who they are through what they choose to do. D, the self-selection bias and inequality in civic participation. Okay, but this brings us to a really important and sometimes slightly uncomfortable question about all this engagement. Does participating civically actually cause improvements in things like educational performance or overall well-being? Or is there a significant self-selection bias going on? Meaning, are the young people who are already advantaged in various ways simply the ones more likely to participate in the first place, and thus they reap further benefits, widening the gap?
That's a crucial nuance. What does the research actually show here? Are these engagement pathways genuinely building a more equitable society, helping those who need it most? Or are they unintentionally just reinforcing existing structures and inequalities?
Well, it's complex. On the one hand, countless studies do show genuinely positive impacts associated with civic engagement. Things like increased self-esteem, higher self-awareness, sometimes decreased risky behaviors, and definitely the development of pro-social attitudes and behaviors. That's all positive. However, the research also points pretty strongly towards a significant self-selection bias. Young volunteers, for instance, often already have higher educational aims, higher self-esteem, and higher intrinsic motivation for schoolwork before they even start volunteering. They tend to already possess a dominant status within their peer group and have a higher self-perceived intellectual potential. So essentially, it often seems to be the well-equipped individuals, those already predisposed towards confidence, achievement, and social connection, who are most likely to volunteer or get involved civically. And these experiences then further enhance their existing advantages. It becomes this compounding effect where the rich get richer, so to speak, in terms of social capital, skills, opportunities.
So it's not necessarily that civic engagement creates all these advantages out of thin air, but rather that those who already possess many of these advantages are more likely to participate in the first place. And then they benefit disproportionately, potentially leaving those who might gain the most from such experiences, maybe less confident kids, those with fewer resources lagging even further behind.
That is, unfortunately, the sobering conclusion that much of the research points towards. There's evidence, for example, that while empathy is consistently and positively linked to civic engagement, more empathetic people tend to participate more. Social anxiety is negatively correlated, meaning if you're socially anxious, you're less likely to participate unless strong, egoistic motivations are present. Things like self-protection, maybe this will help me overcome my anxiety, social approval, people will think well of me, or clear career promotion benefits. This looks great on my CV. So if you're anxious, you might need that extra self-interested push to get involved, whereas someone who's already confident and connected might jump in more readily for purely altruistic reasons or just for the social aspect. This creates this deeply embedded, often invisible form of social inequality within civic participation itself. Civic engagement, ironically, can paradoxically contribute to and even exacerbate existing social disparities. Those with existing advantages, confidence, connections, resources, are more likely to participate. They benefit more from participating. And this widens the gap between the haves and have-nots of social capital and opportunity. And this brings us right back full circle to that very first story about the email, doesn't it? That desperate need to appear good, to operate within accepted norms, to gain approval, it can be a powerful motivator, absolutely. But sometimes that drive might mask underlying self-interest or simply reflect existing privilege. And our participation, even when seemingly good, can inadvertently reinforce the very social structures and inequalities we might consciously wish to challenge. The cage of goodness isn't just internal, it's intricately woven into the fabric of society itself, and it often benefits those who already hold the keys. Outro.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive we've taken today. It feels like we've covered so much ground. From that really intimate internal struggle, we started with the pressure to shape ourselves into a good person at work, maybe sacrificing honesty for agreeableness. All the way through the profound psychological theories of Jung's persona and shadow, seeing how those inner dynamics play out. We've tried to unmask this modern version of manufacturing consent, how it operates subtly in our digital landscape through algorithms and media concentration. And we even got a glimpse into that intense, high-stakes cat-and-mouse game between citizens and state censorship. And finally, connecting it all back to the evolving, sometimes really paradoxical nature of civic engagement right here in Western democracies, seeing how even our attempts to participate and do good can sometimes get tangled up with inequality.
It really has been a journey, hasn't it? Across the personal, the political, the technological. I think what stands out is just how pervasive the pressure towards conformity can be. Whether it's self-imposed, to maintain that carefully constructed persona Jung talked about, or whether it's subtly enforced by powerful media narratives, digital algorithms sorting what we see, or even through direct state control in some places. We've seen how the very tools designed for connection, the internet, social media, can also be wielded for disconnection. Elites leveraging them to dodge scrutiny, while ordinary citizens have to become incredibly innovative just to make their voices heard, even anonymously sometimes. And that shift we discussed in youth civic engagement, it really highlights how societies adapt, how people find new avenues for expression when the old ones feel blocked or irrelevant, even if those new avenues aren't always recognized or valued by the established systems.
It is really striking when you lay it all out like that, just how deeply ingrained this need for conformity, or perhaps the appearance of conformity, can be, whether it's coming from inside us or outside us.
Indeed. It seems to be a fundamental tension, doesn't it? In the individual human experience, trying to balance authenticity with social acceptance, and also within any society, balancing order with freedom, consensus with dissent, we are constantly navigating that tricky space between who we feel we truly are deep down, who we present ourselves to be in different contexts, and who society, or our particular corner of it, expects or pressures us to be. It's a constant negotiation.